are behind these walls. The first time Officer Maya Reyes saw inmate Danielle Carter, she was pressed against the cold concrete wall of cell block D, holding a younger prisoner steady, while a guard twice her size screamed into the girl's face. Danielle wasn't fighting back. She wasn't cowering either. She was simply standing there like a human shield, calm and immovable as stone, her dark eyes carrying something Maya had never seen in 5 years of working corrections. A dignity so fierce it could cut glass. Maya had walked past 100 moments like that one. She kept walking. But something inside her, something she couldn't name yet, turned around and looked back. Maplewood. Women's Correctional Facility was not a place where softness survived long. It was a place of fluorescent lights that hummed through the night, of doors that slammed with a finality that reminded every woman inside that the world had decided they were done with her. Maya had learned to move through it with the detachment of someone who understood that caring too much was its own kind of prison. She wore her uniform like armor. She followed protocol. She said good morning to the women in the cells, the way a person says good morning to the weather, not expecting a response, not truly offering one. She had been good at keeping that distance for a long time. And then Danielle Carter arrived, serving 8 years for a financial crime that had actually been orchestrated by the man she loved. And the distance Maya had built so carefully began, in the quietest possible way, to close. It started with books. The facility had a small library, a glorified closet, really with shelves of donated paperbacks, and a single window that let in a column of gray afternoon light. Maya was assigned to supervise the library 2 evenings a week, and Danielle was one of the few inmates who came there with any regularity. She would sit with her knees tucked beneath her on the narrow bench, reading with the focused intensity of someone who understood that stories were a form of survival. Maya noticed the titles she chose: literary fiction, philosophy, poetry. One evening she noticed Danielle reading a collection of Pablo Neruda, and something cracked open in her chest so quietly she almost didn't feel it. She had read that same book at 22, lying on the floor of her first apartment, falling apart after a heartbreak she thought would kill her. She stood behind her desk and said nothing. But the next week, she left a different Neruda collection on the bench before Danielle arrived. Danielle didn't acknowledge it. Not that night. But 3 evenings later, she looked directly at Maya across the room and said a single sentence. Not a question, not a thank you, just a quiet observation about a line she'd read, a line about love being so short and forgetting so long. And Maya, who had spent 5 years training herself not to be seen, felt entirely and terrifyingly seen. She responded. It was just a few words, but it was the first genuine exchange she had allowed herself inside those walls in longer than she could honestly remember, and something in her recognized the danger of it immediately. She went home that night and sat in her kitchen for an hour before she could bring herself to eat, trying to understand what was happening to her and knowing, even then, that understanding it wouldn't stop it. The weeks that followed were a slow accumulation of stolen moments, a borrowed sentence, a glance that lasted a breath longer than it should have. The way Danielle's shoulders dropped when she talked about her daughter on the outside, a little girl being raised by a grandmother while her mother counted the days, inside a system that had already decided her worth. Maya learned the shape of Danielle's sadness the way you learn a landscape. Gradually, through light and shadow, through what was said and more through what was not. She learned that Danielle laughed rarely, but when she did, it was the kind of laugh that made the fluorescent lights seem less cruel. She learned that Danielle had given up believing anyone in a position of authority would ever look at her and see a person rather than a number, and she learned that she herself had given up believing she could still feel things the way she once had, deep and inconvenient and entirely unmanageable things. There is a particular kind of love that grows in impossible places, not despite the impossibility but almost because of it, because when everything around people is stripped down to its barest and most brutal truth, pretense becomes impossible and what remains is entirely real. Maya did not choose what she felt. She argued with it privately, fiercely, through weeks of sleepless nights and long drives home where she gripped the steering wheel and talked herself back toward reason. She knew the rules. She knew the consequences. She knew that the entire architecture of her professional life stood in direct opposition to the feeling that had taken root in her with the quiet stubbornness of something that intended to survive. She knew all of this, and she also knew that when Danielle Carter spoke to her, she felt like a person again in a way she had stopped expecting to feel. The crisis came on a Tuesday in February. A new guard, a man named Burroughs who wore his authority like a weapon, had decided that Danielle needed to be taught a lesson for what he called an attitude problem, which was in truth simply Danielle's refusal to make herself small in the way some guards demanded. Maya arrived at the end of her shift to find Danielle in solitary, placed there on a report that Maya knew immediately was fabricated, because she had seen Burroughs falsify documentation before and because she knew Danielle's restraint the way she knew her own heartbeat. What happened next was the thing that would define the rest of Maya's life more cleanly than any decision she had ever made. She went to the warden. She submitted her own report. She put her career, her pension, 5 years of service, and her carefully maintained professional survival on a table and pushed it forward for Danielle Carter. Not because she thought she would win, but because she had reached the place inside herself where doing nothing was no longer something she could live inside. The investigation took 3 weeks. Burroughs was suspended, Danielle was released from solitary, and Maya was transferred to a different block, quietly, the way institutions handle things they'd rather not name directly. They did not see each other again for months. Maya requested reassignment 3 times and was denied twice before finally being moved back to cell block D on a technicality of scheduling. The first time she saw Danielle again after everything, Danielle was sitting at the library bench with a new book, and she looked up when Maya came through the door, and something passed between them that neither of them had the language for yet: gratitude, recognition, and underneath those things something older and more difficult and more honest than either of them had expected to find inside a place like this. They never broke the rules in the way the world might imagine. They were more careful than that, more respectful of each other than that. What they had was built entirely of presence and restraint and the understanding that love is not always defined by what it takes, but sometimes by what it refuses to take. Maya visited the library. Danielle read. They talked about books and daughters, and the strange way time moved differently, in places designed to contain it. They did not pretend that the walls weren't there. They built something real inside them anyway, which is perhaps the most radical thing 2 people can do. If you believe in kindness and if you believe that love can exist in the most unexpected and unforgiving places, please take a moment right now to like this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that human connection cannot be fully contained by any system, any wall, or any set of rules designed to prevent it. Your support means more than, and helps these stories reach the people who need them most. When Danielle was released, 4 years later, on a clemency petition that Maya had quietly helped to build through channels, she spent months learning to navigate. She stood at the gate in the early morning gray with a paper bag of belongings and a daughter she hadn't been able to hold for 4 years running toward her across the parking lot. Maya watched from inside. She was still on shift. She stood at the window and watched the reunion with the careful steadiness of someone who had made peace with the particular grief of loving something you cannot keep, and she felt not emptiness but a fullness that surprised her, because Danielle was free and something that had been locked inside. Maya's own chest for most of her adult life had walked out those gates alongside her. They found each other 6 months later, outside, quietly, on their own terms, in a coffee shop on an ordinary Thursday, where no one had authority over anyone and the light came through the windows at an angle that had nothing institutional about it. They sat across from each other and there was nothing between them but a table and the accumulated weight of everything they had already survived, and it turned out that was more than enough foundation to begin. Before we reach the end of this story, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever found something real and meaningful in a place where you least expected it? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Some loves are not built in easy places. Some loves are built in the places that were designed to prevent them, and they are stronger for it, and more honest and more carefully chosen. Maya and Danielle would never say their story was simple, or that the world outside was waiting to celebrate what they had found. But they would say, and did say, to each other, in the quiet of ordinary evenings that neither of them had believed they would ever reach, that the love that survives the hardest conditions is the kind that knows exactly what it is. It has been tested in the way that only impossible circumstances can test something, and it held. In the end, through everything, the walls and the rules and the years and the grief, it simply, stubbornly, beautifully held,